Good morning again, everyone. My name is Arnold Weinfeld with the Michigan State University Institute for Public Policy and Social Research. And on behalf of the U-M Wolverine Caucus, we are pleased to be collaborating today with the University Research Corridor for their legislative forum series on understanding tech transfer's role in solving COVID-19 challenges. Please note that attendees are muted. If you have questions for the panelists, feel free to use the Q&A box. Your moderator, Brittany Effelter Kane, will be asking questions, and I and Amber Shin of URC will be monitoring the Q&A box. Again, you're muted, so the hand feature does not work. Just as a reminder, attendees cannot see each other. You'll see the panelists, they can't see you. And when it comes to questions, we'll start with questions that have been already submitted by attendees via email before the event. We may not get to all of your questions, but we'll do our best and try to answer as many as we can. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Brittany Effelter Kane, Executive Director of Michigan's University Research Corridor. Britt?
Thank you, Arnold. It is a pleasure for us to be able to partner with you and IPSR and our friends at Wolverine Caucus for this important event. And I want to welcome all of the viewers to come to spend some time with us this morning to learn a little bit more about technology transfer. Sometimes we refer to it as technology commercialization. And that is essentially moving innovations created at our universities out into the marketplace where it can be used. Specifically today, we are going to be focusing on the tech transfer that's happening at our universities to move COVID-19 related technologies out into the market so we have more broad access to these technologies during the pandemic. So I also want to thank legislators and staff for joining us today. We are very excited to be with you today. You might remember we typically do 2 of these kinds of legislative forums a year. Obviously, we had to put this one on hold during the pandemic, and now we're coming to you virtually. So glad you can be with us. So with this, we want a couple things to do a couple things with this forum today, and that is to talk a little bit about technology transfer and the process. Some of you in the audience are very familiar with this space, and some of you it might be a bit new, and some of you might be maybe like the rest of us who has spent a lot of time in this space, but it's still sometimes mysterious what happens. This slide here is borrowed from Autumn, which is a national organization on tech transfer directors, and it basically displays the life cycle of innovation, moving it from universities out into the market. And if you start with research expenditures, these are numbers from the URC over the last 5 years. And so this is the 11.26 billion. That's what we've done in research over the last 5 years. And out of that research, some of it turns out to be innovations that could potentially be commercialized. And so you can see we did more than 3,000 of those. And as you work your way through this cycle, you can see there are patents that are being developed, there are opportunities to then license that technology. And in some cases, it actually becomes the cornerstone of a startup company. And so thankfully, with us today, we have the URC University's tech transfer directors who are experts on this, not even just at our universities, but nationally. And so I would like to introduce them. We have Kelly Sexton, who is the Associate Vice President for Research at the University of Michigan. We have Rich Chilla, the Executive Director at MSU Technologies. And we have Joan Dunbar, Associate Vice President for Research at Wayne State University. They are going to be joined today by entrepreneurs and innovators at our universities who they are working with on COVID-specific technologies. And so, a little bit of background before we get to them. The URC came out with a report that focused on what the universities were doing during the pandemic to fight COVID-19. That report is available at urcmich.org. In our analysis, we found that we were working on, collectively, the 3 universities, more than 500 COVID-19 related research projects. Of those, more than 100 of them were clinical trials, medical device, and COVID-19 testing protocols. And of all of these technologies, 65 and more are working their way through the technology transfer process. I would be remiss if I didn't mention that in the larger entrepreneurship ecosystem, as they like to talk about it, and our place in it, we certainly get a lot of support from the state, the Michigan Economic Development Corporation specifically. I know some of them are in the audience right now, and this is a subway map, they call it, that basically outlines all of the related support programs that are for capital, so funding, but it also includes things like mentorship to support entrepreneurs as they make their way through. This I think you can get at on the Michigan Economic Development Corporation website, and we'll have it on our website as well. So these are our presenters today. We're going to go in alphabetical order at the URC. So first up is Rich Chilla, and he is joined by Jack Lipton, MSU Chair and Professor of Translational Neuroscience, and he's an inventor. And so take it away.
Thanks very much, Britt, and thanks very much for the opportunity to present today. I think I need you to stop sharing, Britt, and then I will share my slides. Perfect. So hopefully everyone can see a slide that says Research and Technology Transfer at MSU. Perfect. So thanks again for the invite. And what I'm here to talk about today is I'm here to talk about how technology that is actually developed at our universities is used to create a difference in this world. And it's really about getting technologies in the hands of the public. What we're trying to do at Michigan State and my colleagues at University of Michigan and at Wayne State, we're trying to create value for research. And creating value means translating new technology to develop drugs, to develop engineering technologies, agricultural technologies, and basically help create economic development, not only in our community, but in the United States. I work in the MSU Innovation Center. I work in MSU Technologies. We're in a building located right on Grand River Avenue. And what we do at MSU Technologies and at Spartan Innovations and at MSU Business Connect, we're the interface between the university and industry and the outside world. So we work with companies to take technologies that we have at the university and help place them in companies. We help to create new companies and startup companies. And we work with venture capitalists who are interested in funding companies. So all of this takes place here at the MSU Innovation Center. Actually, Britt shared a terrific slide that showed the tech transfer cycle for Michigan universities. I'm showing something slightly different here. What I'm showing is that Michigan universities are really part of the bigger US system of tech transfer. And these show some numbers from 1996 through 2017. It really shows the incredible economic impact of university research and technologies on the US economy. US universities are a huge driver of economic development. Over 200 drugs and vaccines have been developed through public-private partnerships since the Bayh-Dole Act was created in 1980. This really has created amazing value and public benefit. When we talk about university technology, it starts with an idea. I'm going to be joined very, very shortly by my colleague Jack Lipton, who's a faculty member in Department of Neuroscience. And typically a faculty member will talk to my office, and that's called a disclosure. We then take all of these ideas that we get from our faculty, we screen them, we look for those that have commercial potential, and we protect them. And what that usually means is we file some type of a patent application on them. And then those patent rights are licensed to a company who commercializes it. And this is how technology gets commercialized in a university. Britt was showing how some of the funding that we get from MEDC is on the subway map. That all works right in here. That funding is critical for our offices to help advance nascent technology to more mature technologies that attract companies. But sometimes the world intervenes and actually things will jump from an idea through commercialization very, very fast. And so I'm actually, what we're going to be talking about now, my colleague Jack Lipton, we're going to talk about something that came out of his research lab, and we had to skip a bunch of steps. And Jack worked really quickly to take a very early nascent lab technology and to try to make a difference with it. And so by that, I'm going to introduce Jack, and I'll stop sharing my slides and let Jack begin to share his. Jack?
Thank you, Rich. Let me get this going. Hopefully I'm picking the right window. Good, I did. Okay. Thank you, Rich. So I'm Jack Lipton. As mentioned, I'm a chair and professor at Michigan State. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about our COVID-19 early detection program and how this went from some work we had done in human research that started right when the pandemic began because we thought we could, and we thought it would keep us busy since we weren't allowed in the lab unless we were only doing COVID-19 research, and how that has morphed into something that may have commercial and national relevance. So I'll go through it. So let me tell you a little bit about this program that we started. Now, this program was designed for, we were asked to put together a program to study asymptomatic spread of COVID-19 on campus. So the ideas that we had and the original goals based upon what the university asked us to do was to operationalize an easy, non-invasive process to test asymptomatic faculty, staff, and student volunteers. The idea here being we have clinics that are running PCR tests for people with COVID-19. What are we doing to track the people that may have hidden cases of it or are spreading the virus asymptomatically? We had to develop a system to collect, process, analyze, and transmit results on up to 10,000 samples per week. We achieved this in 8 weeks from concepts to actually taking our first samples. We had to also determine in this process, our original goal was to determine which groups and what behaviors are associated with the spread of SARS-CoV-2. You know, we have a lot of undergraduates who could guess which behaviors might be associated with spread. We had to take proactive steps then to minimize spread on and around campus, demonstrate that academic labs can rapidly transition, in this case, from the type of research that they do to supporting the pandemic and a biomedical crisis, and also instill confidence in our ability when we talk to our constituents, both faculty, staff, and students and their parents, that we can monitor appropriately the transmission of the virus. So what did we have to do? What we had to do was develop an entire system to give kits to people so that they could provide us with a sample, get those back, run them in the lab, and give them back their results. So the first thing that we did was we worked with the School of Packaging at MSU. And so you can see here, this is a box along with the directions that it takes to create this box. This was the first step in taking our saliva technology, which we had worked on saliva sampling in the lab, and we had developed some IRB-based human studies, and we were testing this out kind of between April and May. And we got the School of Packaging involved to help us distribute this en masse. So they created this box, and as you can see on the right picture, you can see there's 2 starburst holes in this prototype, and those are used to hold tubes for our test kit. And so they developed this original prototype and started to produce this for us en masse, and this is done by hand by volunteers and students at the School of Packaging. We then worked with a company called Westrock, which makes a lot of boxes. That's kind of their thing. And we had connections between an assistant dean in the School of Packaging who had industry ties to Westrock based on her prior career. And we connected and developed this as the fully branded version, I would call it commercial in quotes, but this is our production version of our spit kit. And you can see here it has the same 2 starburst holes on the top. It's branded with MSU branding. It's also got directions on how to use it and how our process works. And you can see some of the contents inside here. And you can see how the box works. The large vial is one you spit in, and we have a transfer pipette that you can see inside this box here. And then it goes in, the sample gets put into this small vial, which I'll explain a little bit more about later. So the box is used as a holder for tubes, as well as holding all of the contents for the kit. We had to get these samples into the lab, and so we needed to make sure we had a way to document them. And we worked with a company, which is a local company in Michigan called Lowry. They're in Brighton, Michigan, and they're specialists in stickers and auto ID QR codes. And so they developed these custom stickers for us. You can see this kind of barbell shaped sticker. It's got what's called an auto ID, which is kind of like a QR code on one side, and it's got an alphanumeric code on the other. The auto ID is for the laboratory, and the alphanumeric code is for the user who gives us their spit sample. And you can see the way that that sticker is used here. It's on the top of the vial. This is what gets checked into the laboratory. And then on the other side is the alphanumeric code, and you'll see how people enter this into our system. So I'm going to take you on a life cycle of a sample and how it goes through the system quickly. The first thing that happens is we develop with IT an entire process for getting people involved and how they have to volunteer, they register, then we pick them in various groups to give us a sample. So first thing that happens is you get a text that says, hey, you need to pick up a kit and spit. And then they go to a website to register for that. They pick up a kit at one of our 10 locations that we have on campus, and you can see here are the insides of that kit. I told you about the large spit tube, the small tube, the dropper, and a biohazard bag. It all comes inside the kit. They then, after they give their sample, they log on to a website and they type in that 3-letter and 2-number code. It's not case specific, so it's easy to do. You have to enter it twice so you don't make a mistake. If you enter it twice wrong, you have issues. You then bring it to a drop box, and you can see the drop boxes look like big trash cans, but they're locked and they're really heavy. We made sure that people wouldn't, there wouldn't be too much mischief with them. So there's a couple of cinder blocks on the bottom of those so they don't get moved around. And we collect those every day. And you can see here, we've employed, some drivers were furloughed from the infrastructures and planning group on campus that does a lot of logistics work. And we were able to employ people that are part of IPF so that we could have them working on this as we repurpose their jobs from other things they might be doing on campus. So those samples all get picked up from the different locations. They come into the laboratory. They get gunned in, and you can see here, there's that auto ID sticker from Lowry that is used to rapidly check in all of those samples. And then they move through the process. Someone takes the sample out, moves it into a small well format, and you can see here there's someone who's taking all of those samples after they've been moved into a small deep well plate. They take that, they produce RNA from the spit. It gets gunned in, gets put into a Quant Studio, which is a PCR machine, and then the data is evaluated. I have a whole process that I could talk about, but it's not really as relevant, but it's terribly interesting. The entire thing we do is through pooling processes, and we have a transposition pooling process where all of these samples go into pools, and people are in 2 separate pools that are unique to them only. And so we can go through a lot of samples, save a lot of money and a lot of time in assessing whether people are positive or negative for SARS-CoV-2. The data then comes in and is aggregated through an IT dashboard, which was produced. We worked diligently and very quickly with a lot of experts on campus to develop a way for us to track our samples on campus. And then once those go in, people get a text back and say, how did you do? Check your email for a message about your saliva sample, because we know our emails are secure, but our texts aren't. So we tell them to go check their email, and then they get their result. And you can see here, this is just from last week, what our numbers were like when we started this. We did our pre-registration in August, and it wasn't until the president kind of sent a single subject email saying that this is an important thing to do that you can see this real spike around September 6th in our enrollment. And you can see that the vast majority of our enrollees are students, as indicated by the dark green. And you can see the kind of the samples we're running in our first week or so of testing. We're getting about 600 or 700 samples per day. We invite 1,000 people per day right now, but we can easily do 2,000. Right now, because of the way that we're sampling people in a random process and a resampling once a week, we're not reaching capacity yet, but we're going to be utilizing this to take it outside of the university. So there's opportunities for community-based assessment of SARS-CoV-2. So the original goals are different from what we ended up with, right? So we've developed a rapidly deployable system using university intellectual and technological assets developed in collaboration with industry specialists. We've developed a cost-effective and novel saliva kit. This kit only costs $3 to make. So if you look at some of the other kits that are available commercially, they run about $20 to $25. The low per sample run cost, because of the way that we're pooling and the innovative strategy for utilizing human hands, not robots, and dealing with a pooling strategy, produces an $8 per sample cost for running a PCR test. And we have the best thing that came out of this is the potential scalability for either a statewide or national network of labs positioned to conduct surveillance testing like this. And then, of course, the ability to take that saliva kit, as Rich had mentioned, and potentially use it for production distribution commercially. Rutgers has its own kit, and they charge about $20 a pop for their kit, and they've been grossing about $200 million a month selling their kit. And that's it. I'll stop.
Jack, thanks very much. The only thing I wanted to close with was, this is really a terrific example of a researcher like Jack and his team going from seeing a need, taking technology they had in the lab, completely adapting in a different format, and getting it ready and using it in almost like a commercial way in a very short period of time. And we did that in conjunction because we had good corporate partnerships and the support of the university. So thanks very much for the opportunity to share a look at something that went from laboratory to use in a very rapid period of time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rich. Thank you, Jack. As someone who, I think most of us who have had a COVID test, a nasal swab or throat, this is very appealing to a spit test, and certainly getting more people tested at a lower cost and lower time is huge. Makes one of the reasons I'm so impressed with what the URC universities have done through this time. So moving on, the next group is from U of M, and Kelly Sexton is the Associate Vice President for Research, Technology Transfer and Innovation Partnerships at Michigan. And she is joined by Peter Falzon, President and CEO of Ripple Science Corporation. I'm going to stop share.
Great. Good morning, and thank you, Britt. And thank you, everybody, for joining in. I'm going to pull up my slides now. So at U of M Tech Transfer, our mission statement is about redefining how world-class university research can fuel a region and solve the world's greatest challenges. And I think Professor Lipton just brought us a great real-world example of how fantastic research universities like the three represented here this morning can bring their resources and their intellectual capacity to bear to go after these great challenges. His story is one of hundreds across the three campuses, the three universities represented here today. I know that at the University of Michigan alone, we went from having virtually no active COVID research projects in early March to where recently we showed over 200 active projects aimed at understanding, treating, and combating SARS-CoV-2. At U of M Tech Transfer, we now have over 46 new COVID-related inventions, and we've launched a number of new startup companies to help bring these innovations to the market. So for the University of Michigan, we are actually the nation's largest public research university by volume of research activity. And this $1.6 billion in research activity translates to being an engine of discovery. And technology transfer, as my colleague Rich was describing, is the way that we take these innovations and move them out of the lab and into the marketplace. Increasingly, an important way that we do this is through the launch of new startup companies. The startup companies are important for our state and for our region. They tend to be sticky. They tend to stay located close to the universities that launch them. And there they create new jobs and create economic opportunity and help diversify our state and region's economy. Now, to really get the flywheel going and to have a vibrant ecosystem to support these startups, you essentially need three ingredients. You need innovation, and I think the three universities that comprise the University Research Corridor represent one of the largest innovation clusters anywhere in the country. You need talent, and here I'm specifically talking about business and entrepreneurial talent as one of the key gaps. And I want to talk a little bit about a program that we're fortunate to have in the state to support this important talent component. And you need capital, and here I'm talking about the angel and venture capital that startups need to be able to grow and scale their businesses. So on the talent piece, we are fortunate to have a program in the state of Michigan that I think is really the envy of other states around the country. The Technology Transfer Talent Network is a statewide network that brings individuals with significant business, entrepreneurial, and investment backgrounds to our university tech transfer offices with the goal of mentoring and supporting early stage startup teams, helping them to develop and refine their business model, and ultimately help them to be able to launch a company that can raise financing and grow and scale. Today, you'll be hearing from two individuals who are now leading university spin-out companies that originally got introduced to those opportunities while they were working as mentors and residents through the T3N program. The third component that I was wanting to talk about this morning is access to capital. And we know that for reasons of history and geography and network effects, venture capital tends to be heavily clustered in just 3 states, with California, Massachusetts, and New York accounting for over 75% of all venture capital dollars invested in the US. And what this translates to on the ground is that we see in our region, it takes our startup companies nearly 2 years longer to raise their first $500,000 worth of funding as compared to startup companies located on the coast. So with this bit of background and introduction about the ingredients we think are important for this entrepreneurial flywheel, it's my pleasure to introduce my, my colleague, Peter Falzon, to talk to us a bit today about the work that he's doing with Ripple Biosciences. Peter has an interesting background coming from Michigan, but most recently spending about 25 years leading life science teams and companies in the Bay Area. So he brings a great perspective about the two differences between our two ecosystems, which is why I thought he would be great for this panel this morning.
Thank you, Kelly. So as Kelly mentioned, my background, I have about 25 years history working in biotech companies in Silicon Valley. So being a 2-time University of Michigan graduate, you might ask the question, why did I go to Silicon Valley in the early 1990s? And the answer is because Silicon Valley had a concentration of those 3 things that Kelly talked about. Lots of innovation coming out of their universities, lots of talent that was interested in translating that innovation into things that could benefit society. And of course, as you saw on that last slide, a lot of capital chasing those opportunities. So in 2016, when I started spending more time back in Michigan, as I said, the MIR program was my landing place. And it was where I was able to connect with the ecosystem here, and also where I noticed that, yeah, this special combination of innovation, talent, and capital also had developed quite a bit in the 25 years I was away. What I was most impressed with was the quality of the technologies percolating out of these universities. Next. And then, so in 2018, I transitioned from mentor in residence to taking the helm of one of these technologies. Ripple Science is a software platform that is used by researchers who do clinical trials. Next. Since the company was founded in 2017, we have created 22 jobs. And regarding capital, I have to say that the MEDC first capital programs, right? The funds that are sponsored or somehow supported by the MEDC to provide very first capital to companies was really critical to Ripple getting off the ground, to getting the first funding, getting the first money in the door that allowed the founders to get the first product out the door. So in 2018, when I joined the company, I was able to leverage the first capital that came from these economic development supported funds to go on and raise $7 million more to keep the company growing. And most importantly, again, if you think of where all the capital is on the map that Kelly showed, it was a really important goal for me to try and bring more venture capital into Michigan from outside. So we were able to, of the 7 million, 3 million came into Michigan from outside Michigan, which I think was a great result and return on the investment that the MEDC funds put into Ripple. And next. So that first capital gap is critical, and why does it exist? So when I was a mentor and Kelly and I had a first conversation, we were talking about the differences between taking technologies and commercializing them out in Silicon Valley versus here. And I said, you know, that initial capital gap to me was the biggest difference. And on the coast, angels who have sold businesses tend to fill this role. They just tend to understand the industry, the technology, and put a check down. In Michigan, the MEDC programs play a critical role in filling that gap, and it's essential for companies to get off the ground. And then finally, next. Thanks, Kelly. What is Ripple doing to contribute in the time of COVID? So our technology is used to recruit and manage patients in clinical trials. And during the, you know, when there's a crisis, things change, and technology is often the catalyst for that change. So our technology is being used by several teams, one doing a point of care rapid antibody test kit validation, where their goal was to recruit patients and gather information in 6 weeks that normally would take them 6 to 12 months. And then the second is a vaccine trial. We have a group in South Africa who, again, was also trying to compress recruitment and data collection for a COVID vaccine trial in South Africa from, you know, 8 to 12 months into 2 months. And we have more as these studies continue to, you know, proliferate as we deal with the crisis. So thank you for the opportunity and for all the help getting Ripple Science up and off the ground.
Thank you, Kelly. Thank you, Peter. You know, I appreciate, Kelly, you making the note how we did know COVID-19 related research really at the universities and in a very short amount of time transitioned very quickly to doing hundreds of projects. And I think that that's pretty interesting, as well as highlighting the need for talent in the mentors and residents and capital. So thank you, and thanks for the work that you're doing with Ripple Science, Peter. Next up, we have our Wayne State team, and we are joined by Joan Dunbar, who is the Associate Vice President for Research at Wayne State, and she's joined by Braden Robinson, Chief Operations Officer at Seraph Biosciences.
Hi, good morning, and again, thank you, Britt, for inviting us to present today. So I'd like to present some of the Wayne State COVID-related responses. As you just mentioned, COVID hit us very hard and very fast, and I think it was a very good reflection of how quickly and nimble the faculty and the innovators of our academic institutions could quickly pivot and turn their research towards addressing the problems of COVID. So I will be talking a little bit about some of our startup companies that also pivoted in a very quick way and also collaborated with some of our researchers in creating new projects in order to address COVID. I also want to introduce Braden, and Braden is the CEO of one of our startup companies, and Braden also has pivoted or expanded their research and their technologies into the ability to address the COVID crisis. So that being said, I'd like to move on a little bit and follow along from my colleagues and talking about tech transfer in general, and Rich brought it up. The part of tech transfer's role is not just the transactional side of it and the IP protection side of it, but to also really be able to add value and create value for that technology. And I think this is one of the critical parts of what we do in tech transfer that's not always recognized or appreciated by the people from the outside world or even from the inside of the university. So when we look at the different roles of tech transfer, we have protection of the intellectual property that comes from the academic research enterprise. We have our role in commercialization and our role in supporting startups. But truly underlying the success of all those programs is the ability to create value. And this value creation, by that I mean reducing the risk. Because when you look at academic research, it's very, very early stage research. It may be scientifically, it is very rigorous. And it supports and reaches all the standards of scientific rigor. But that is quite different from having something which truly is a technology that can be validated both in terms from an industry perspective and a product development perspective, and also from the perspective of what is the commercial opportunity. And this is a challenge that we as tech transfer officers encounter almost every time that we see a new technology coming through the door from our faculty inventors. So I just wanted to share this slide, which I'll give credit to Jacob Johnson from InnovoSource. And he's called his program Mind the Gap, and he's published a couple of different reviews and reports over the last few years on how we as communities and the research community can actually address how we become more effective in translating academic research into commercially viable products and companies. And so if you look at the continuum from research technology to startup, you see that the funding sources on the left-hand side supporting most of the basic research is coming from federal sources. On the right-hand side, and this is to which Peter was speaking, these are the private funding sources. And they're the ones that really invest in the startup companies and move them forward. And hopefully with an investment that is very quick and enables growth of the company very quickly. So what we have in the middle, however, is this gap of how we take this basic research and understand the true value and validate that value so that we have investable commercialization opportunities at this right-hand side where we are getting the private investment. And this is a gap where the academic tech transfer office are really filling and taking out the risk of the early stage technologies and adding value to the technologies. So 2 ways we're doing that, and I have to give credit to the state of Michigan and the MEDC because they've been absolutely instrumental in helping the academic institutions create an infrastructure to be able to support the transition of technologies from this early stage into an investable pipeline for startup companies. And that's the biggest part of this. We really want these technologies coming out of the university to be a commercial success and to be investable, to enable our startup companies to rapidly receive the funding that they so critically need to be able to be successful in the real world. So the 2 things we need here are funding, and this is where the NEDC has been instrumental in providing funding to take these technologies and actually validate that the technology does what we think we do. But the other part of that, and Kelly alluded to it, and Peter and Braden are both perfect examples of that, is the access to talent and these experienced industry experts and venture funding experts that really help us decide who should be funded, what projects should be funded under these programs, and to help us better understand how that funding should be used and the commercial positioning of the programs and the projects. So these have been critical, and I think this is where the success of the Michigan tech transfer is really growing because we've had such support in these areas. Now, there's one other small part I want to focus on here, and that is, as I mentioned, most of the funding for basic science discovery comes from the federal government, but the federal government always also understands and appreciates that we need to be able to translate these technologies. We're using public funds, but putting it into academic research. There has to be something coming out on the other end. And so the federal government is also supporting a much smaller amount of their budget, of course, into translational programs. Just a few of the programs right now that are out there coming from the two major agencies are from the National Science Foundation and from National Institutes of Health. And they're interested, A, in the translation of the technology, and they're also interested in talent development. And this is another big part of what the Tech Transfer offices are now doing with some of these gap funding programs, is the talent development, the entrepreneurial scientist, having the scientists understand the significance of their research and how to translate that research into products of public benefit and obviously for economic development. Again, these are very competitive programs, and the infrastructure that we are now building within Michigan is really laying the foundation for us to be able to further leverage this for additional federal funding and for the additional opportunities it provides for both technology transfer and also talent development. So finally, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the impact. And I'm going to do impact in two different ways here. And one of them will be the impact of some of this value add that we've been able to provide to some of our new startup companies, and also which of our new startup companies are also involved in COVID development. So Repeller is a brand new startup company. Repeller has an interesting story. The technology in Repeller is actually, it's a marine coating that prevents biofouling. And Repeller started with a little bit of this gap funding that came through the early proof of concept. It also had the advantage of a mentor in residence. Mentor in residence also was able to make them very competitive for the National NSF National I-Corps Award. And they also received a phase 1 STTR program, a federally funded small business technology transfer grant. That was about $250,000, and they're in the running right now for their phase 2 STTR. So this is a company which very quickly, through those programs, has developed their business model. I must admit that they've pivoted a little bit through those programs as well, but now seem to be well on the road to be successful, and they should have a very quick turnaround time to having a product on the market by the completion of their phase 2 and looking towards a strategic partnership. Another company I'd like to point out is Motivation. Motivation is a medical device company. Motivation also has benefited from the value creation by the programs that Tech Transfer is able to offer. Motivation did receive some very early technology development funding. We also had an innovation fellow, a postdoctoral innovation fellow, working on the commercialization roadmap together with a mentor in residence that was working on the project and the program. The mentor in residence liked the technology. He liked the opportunity. He's now the CEO of Motivation. Motivation was able to receive a fast track STTR funding from the federal government, and that was equal to about 1.7 million. And now they're in the early stages of private fundraising at the moment. So Motivation is one example of one of our companies which was able to quickly pivot or expand the application of their technology into COVID. So they did a lot of very, very quick validation studies or proof of concept studies in the lab, and they've submitted grants and applications to the federal government as well to be able to continue development. Another company that's also been doing COVID research and quickly pivoted was Cogent. Cogent is a drug delivery company. Cogent has raised about, it's getting close to $10 million right now. They're moving into a very serious Series A at the moment. But Cogent also partnered up with another investigator who had never really worked on, certainly hadn't worked on COVID, but he had worked on viruses. He was part of the Zika virus. And he had a very cool idea about how to inhibit the COVID virus, but he had no way of delivering the therapeutic. So they teamed together to create a new composition of matter, and now they're working on developing and translating that technology as fast as they can. So Saraf is another example that I'm really now going to let Braden take over and move forward and tell us a little bit about the Saraf story. But one thing I would like to point out, and Kelly also alluded to it, is the programs that have been established across the state have been instrumental in collaboration between the institutions as well. And I smile when I say that Braden came in as a mentor in residence at the University of Michigan, came back into the state of Michigan, but Wayne State was the beneficiary of Braden being brought back into the state of Michigan. And so I think that shows tremendous opportunities for these programs and being able to bring money and talent into the state as well as growing our own. So Braden, if you would like to move from here, thank you.
Of course, thanks. And I'm going to move quick through the front part just to keep us on time, because I think the Q&A is going to probably be the most interesting here. So Joan, if you would.
Yeah, and
I think you've got the slides, right?
Braden, I don't know why I can't get you down into your slides. Let me try this again. I really apologize.
I only see 4 slides on this one, Joan.
Yes, okay. If you will, I will apologize to everybody very quickly here. And I'll stop sharing for a second. If you would just like to start talking, Braden, I'll get a new slide show up very quickly.
Nope, appreciate it. So a little bit about me. I have an automotive background. Went to what was GMI, is now Kettering. So grew up here in Michigan. And actually left and went to the Bay Area, not unlike Peter, to really try to diversify and get into other industries. My interest was always healthcare, med device, and I found some good partnerships out there. I actually started working for Stryker and spent 15 years of my career at Stryker, which is ironically where I got interested in small companies by doing M&A work and integration of small companies into a larger one. So as Joan mentioned, I came back to Michigan through the MIR program. Probably wouldn't be here without it. So it certainly has been beneficial to me personally, but I also like to think that it's been helpful to the ecosystem. So we'll talk a little bit about that as we go. Seraph as a company was founded really to address the problem of antibiotic resistance. Our 2 co-founders, I think, had a lot of foresight into what was coming, and they really are concerned about what's been coined the post-antibiotic area, right? Antibiotics help us to do a lot of things in our healthcare, not just kind of cure runny noses, right? They enable surgery, they enable a lot of things, and we've all got to do our part to make sure that those are effective. The way we do it, we apply a novel technology to actually identify pathogens, to be able to differentiate between virus and bacteria, and then eventually be able to actually do antibiotic susceptibility testing directly on a pathogen. So Joan, next slide, please. So Jack, fortunately for me, laid out how complex the process is of kind of collecting samples and testing them. We've got a novel device and software that really solves that problem by bringing the result right to the point of care. So you can imagine spitting in a cup and then getting the result 3 minutes later, how much easier that is for healthcare and how much easier that is for patients. So Joan, next slide. And we're particularly proud of it. Oop, there we go. Because we really see this as a platform technology. All right, we're applying it to pathogen detection today in a healthcare environment, but we certainly can see where this could work at a plant. It could work at a school. Then you start to roll that information up and we get kind of epidemiology across the country. So we can understand vectoring, we can understand a lot about our healthcare system. And then we can expand it really to things like environmental monitoring. So being able to keep track of what's going on in air control systems, whatever. But we see this as a platform technology And again, kind of a credit to what's happening at the universities where we can do some basic research and expand it out into several applications. Next slide. So about Seraph in terms of context, you know, we were incorporated. Most of what you see has been since 2017. That's when we were able to close our Series A, which was really kind of our meaningful financing that let us put the management team in place. In terms of economic development, we really keep 23 people busy full time. I've got 9 badged employees and the rest are contract in several different ways. And we've been able to put over $3 million of sponsored research back into Wayne State. That leverages the $10 million of basic research that got the technology and the company to the place where it could be out licensed in the first place. So really you see these two things flowing back and forth to really create a good ecosystem here in Michigan. In terms of programs that we've benefited from, I've listed a lot of them there, right? And not all of these have been financial. Some of these have been in a function of networking, but Invest Detroit, Renaissance have both been really good partners to us. We benefited from the TSS program. We'll talk about that in a couple minutes towards the end. And obviously, we've talked a lot about the MIR program and some of the processes going on at TechTown. So next slide. This really is the main thing we're here to talk about today, right? This talent gap, and Kelly set it up well for us. But finding non-automotive talent in Michigan can be a challenge, right? And I'm an example of kind of repurposed talent, but really finding some of those precision hires for a startup is difficult. And I think this is a spot where MIR programs can really help. And there's kind of this benefit that works in both directions, right? MIR programs can bring folks back to the state and help them to find a company that they can really lean in on. But if you think about that time that I was in MIR, I worked with 12 different companies, okay? And I helped them with their business plans. I helped them with their financing plans. I helped them make some partnerships in larger companies that led to either research or follow-on funding, or even maybe how they shape their product. So in terms of building sustainable business, I think it really is a good way to go in terms of stimulating economy here in Michigan. The big challenge that I think it addresses is this chicken and egg issue, right? You don't have other talent besides automotive here because there's not critical mass of other industries, but there's not critical mass of other industries because there's not the talent, right? So these kinds of measures can really be useful in terms of bridging that gap. It's a challenge for early stage companies that by design are capital efficient to recruit, right? Which can cost you almost an entire year's salary to recruit out of state for a precision hire and or relocate. Those two things are very expensive for companies that are watching every penny. So driving that critical mass here to really give kind of diversified industries in Michigan, I think is really, really helpful. In this last line, right, I stole directly from Peter, so he gets credit for the copy, but it really drives the point home, right, is these MEDC programs are critical to leveling the playing field. So next slide, please. Just a little bit more about us during COVID and how we've pivoted, and then we'll get to the Q&A. I talked about at the top how really our goal was this idea of viral and bacterial infection. For a lot of reasons, we were leading with bacterial ID, and this has brought to the forefront the importance of testing, right, and viral testing. So we've reprioritized a lot within our company to focus on virus detection. We did what a lot of companies had to do, where we had to bear down and really look at our spending. We cut an average of 50% across the board. So we've had to be careful with dollars. Funds that I expected to get me through August, my board is telling me I got to get through the end of Q2. So, you know, in terms of operationalizing a business, that's a big challenge. It's not all bad news though, right? We were able to raise 2.5 in the middle of all of this chaos. And we benefited from several programs, right? The PPP program that a lot of folks have been able to get, the TSS program, again, I want to give a lot of credit to how that was deployed I think working it as investment really works well because there's a potential return for the state, and it worked really efficiently in terms of deploying the capital. And then we've leaned heavily on a lot of our key vendors and found the community support in really getting across the finish line. We have been able to continue our operations, right? We've added 2 heads during COVID. We've continued to file patents. So we've actually got 6 patents now pending. So we continue to grow the IP portfolio. And there are other opportunities for grants and grown up and follow-on funding that have come out of this that we've been exploring. So, and then most of all for us, right, point of care testing is not 6 months ago was not topical. Now it certainly is people understand the importance of it. So there certainly is a silver lining for us in all that's going on. So, and with that, I think we'll turn it back to you, Brittany. Look forward to the Q&A.
Thank you. I really appreciate that, overview of this, because I think a lot of times the technology transfer process is very mysterious to folks, and what all goes in, what comes out, and all of you have done a great job of really laying out how it can be done and the things that you need to get it done. Such as access to capital and talent, and that mentorship in residence, or MIR. And you've also helped us understand a little better about what impact you have. And I wanted to just, in listening particularly to you, Joan, and to Braden, you reminded me, and this is what we found in our report, that making this transition and pivoting at our universities to focusing on COVID-19, we were really able to do that because of the decades and decades of investment from the federal government, from private donors, from the state, into our infrastructure and into creating that expertise. And so, it's not something that could be done without that long-term investment and buildup of infrastructure and expertise. And so being able to turn it and use it is where we are today, and getting these technologies, developing them, and then getting them into the broader public. And so, so I just think that's a huge impact right there. If we had a question, I'm going to switch now to talking a little bit about, there's questions about venture capital specifically. We had a question come in, and I'll just throw it out to all of you. We've talked about VC being on the coast. I think, Kelly, you said 70% of venture capital is really in states. And so the person who's asking the question is whether or not the URC schools are working to develop their own VC efforts here in Michigan. And we've had another follow-on question related to what does the state do to perform some of that? I know we have folks from the Michigan Venture Capital Association who are listening in. We've got folks from the MEDC. And so with that, I think I might, actually, I'm going to use the Socratic method. Rich, can you talk first about Red Cedar Ventures, and then we'll switch it up and you guys can go back and forth.
Sure. Red Cedar Ventures is a small venture fund that is operated by the MSU Foundation. And it's interesting is the fund, for those of you who don't know, the funds that power the MSU Foundation originally came out of the royalties from the cancer chemotherapy drug cisplatin a long time ago. And they were invested and reinvested, and so it's actually the earnings on those funds which create this fund. But it is a captive venture capital fund, and it invests not only in Michigan State University startups, but in fact in startups in Michigan. And so as Peter made a note to me, one of the investors in Ripple, and we invest in community startups, and we invest in startups created by students out of the university as well. So it's very good for those early stage funds, but they're not writing huge checks. They're writing checks for $250K on that order.
I might shift it over to Kelly, talk a little bit about U of M.
Sure. So we have a number of different funding sources on campus for startup companies, starting with, years ago out of our Ross School of Business, one of the, I think the earliest student-run fund in the country, focused specifically on startup companies coming out of our technology transfer efforts. We have an investment fund, a co-investment fund that's run out of our endowment called MINTS, Michigan Invests in New Technologies. That's a $75 million fund. And that's really coming in at the stage of a normal venture capital investment. We realized we had an earlier stage gap, and both Peter and Braden were talking about that earliest stage of capital. So we have the Michigan Biomedical Venture Fund for life sciences and healthcare startup companies. And we're also raising the Accelerate Blue Fund, which is to focus on startup companies in the tech sphere in the very earliest stage. And we're raising that fund through tech transfer, through philanthropy, with the goal of having it become a $20 million evergreen fund.
Great, thanks, Kelly. Joan, did you want to add anything from Wayne State? And also, I know you gave a bit of a nice overview of the resources coming from the MEDC. Maybe touch a little bit on that.
So we don't have a fund per se right now, an investment fund, but that doesn't mean we're not looking in that direction and working towards that direction. I'll leave it at that. We were very fortunate in the early days that we did have a lot of support from the New Economy Initiative to really set up the beginning of this infrastructure, which now the state has continued to support, which was the proof of concept. And I think I'd say that most of these successes we've had and most of the startups and the return on the investment that comes from that, let's call it pre-incubation while it's still in the university, and to make it an opportunity for commercialization, to make it easier for the startup companies to then raise funds. I think that continuum of funding and that continued validation, the continued value add and value creation, we really need to have every step of the way to make sure that when it comes out the other end, we really do have the best possible opportunity. As we said, we're trying to compete with funding from the East Coast and the West Coast, and for companies that have access to a lot of funding. So we need to be putting out companies that really are fundable and investable. And the more we can do that, so that they don't have to spend the time and the runway going out and raising funds, the more that we can give them an investable product, I think that's going to absolutely help everybody. There's something else I think that's missed a lot of the times too, is we talk about specific talent development and the programs there for talent development, but we have increasingly seen, and we see it over and over again, that when a faculty member becomes engaged with the Tech Transfer Office, they tend to have a little bit of a change in their attitude towards how they do research. They're more deliverables. They're thinking about how they can be innovative. And that's resulted in more federal funding. They've been much more successful in actually receiving their federal funded, even if it's directed towards basic science. It's changed their mindset a little bit about not just doing science for the sake of knowledge gain, but for the sake of impact. It goes back to, well, so what, who cares about what you're doing? And when they start getting into that mindset, which is what we really say to the early stage of venture entrepreneurs, so what, who cares? I think that's changing culture, and that's going to make us more successful in translating these early stage technologies as well.
So, yeah. No, go ahead, Rich.
Sorry, I just wanted to jump in. I would be remiss if I didn't mention Michigan Rise, which is a newly created fund, partially funded by MEDC, and that fund is also targeted at early stage startups throughout Michigan.
Yeah, thank you, Rich. One of the things that keeps coming back to me is for folks to, the whole tech transfer process is a bit of a virtuous cycle in that, and I think Braden mentioned this, and maybe Peter too, that when we have an innovation go out and it's licensed, that revenue comes back in and is used to continue on to the next innovation. So it's a bit of a virtuous cycle, as well as for startups like Braden's, where they're then investing back into the process with sponsored research. So I think that's worth thinking about, and why we're so fortunate to have tech transfer offices such as yours. I want to pick up, there was a question specific to investable product. Joan, you mentioned it and a few others. How can you describe that, and what does that look like? How do you identify an investable product?
Well, I think that's the value of the programs where not only is there mentorship and the launching of new startup companies, but the absolute access and reliance that we have when we take these early stage technologies and we try to take the risk out of the technologies, of using our industry experts, of using our venture experts to help us really understand the commercial positioning. And when we're funding the technology validation, we're using the input and the insight of these experts to tell us, well, what should we be putting the money towards? What do we need to validate? How do we make this a validated A, product or a validated technology, and B, to make sure that the business model is also something that will be investable. So we're taking what's being done at the startup level and we're putting it in a step earlier as well to make sure that the product that we're handing off to the startups has already been vetted, it's already been validated, so that they have an easier way of actually then building the business model and gaining the extra investment needed to grow, develop, and actually take that product to market. Our product is giving them something that they can build on and grow and invest. Their product is a product to market, the tangible product to market.
Thanks. I want to go back to Jack because he spent a lot of time really outlining how quickly the process was. You said you skipped some steps, Rich and Jack at MSU. We have a question that came in on pandemic issues, and given this more accelerated process that you've used, will this potentially change after the pandemic? Will change the tech commercialization in general? What do you see there potentially?
I can only speak to my own experience, right? My experience, I've been working with Rich for many years, and I think the most important thing during this time was that I've been working with tech transfer, and I understood the value of that open dialogue, so that all of my faculty, my research intensive faculty, including myself, really understood what that group could offer us. And so when I started working on this, it was strictly for the idea of creating something that people could have access to in terms of volume of testing, because of some of the challenges that were happening. And as a result of going through the process very quickly and working with experts around campus, I started to see things that might be of value outside of the university itself. And so I think one of the most important things is, and I don't know if it's going to structurally change how we do things in the future, it's just that when there is a situation like this, it's about knowing that there is something there that you can talk to your tech transfer person about. And I think that just comes from training and experience, and getting those people involved in the conversation of the research mission all the time. Rich, I don't know if you have a different view on that.
The only thing, no, it's excellent summary. Thanks, Jack. And the only thing I want to say is that, we're looking at ways that we can take this technology for the pandemic and make it available broadly, for other groups to use. And then we may look and see if there's commercial applications of this outside the pandemic that are potentially more of a conventional licensing situation. So like most universities, MSU is making anything developed for the pandemic available for humanitarian purposes, royalty free. But it doesn't mean that outside the pandemic there may be commercial potential for it. And so we'll work with Jack and his team on that. And they've been terrific. As Jack says, we've had a conversation for a while, and they're terrific faculty to work with. One
quick thing to add to that. What we've produced through our process and through the development of our saliva kit and all of that, none of it is really like we have the intellectual property of a patent, right? The idea here is that we've developed a process that works for us. We're totally sharing that with anyone that wants to, but this is, you can create a product that you don't have IP on, right? You can sell popsicles if you want to sell popsicles. If you can sell a lot of them that taste good, you're going to sell a lot of them. And so the idea here is, can we utilize our know-how in doing this and have something that's already ready to go, and then people can just have access to it, I think. It's not always about having a secret.
Thanks. So one of the questions we've got ahead of time, and I am going to share my screen to take us back to that cycle that I had in the beginning, this one. And I will put it in view. There it is. Okay. I wanted to ask the question, in this cycle, you can see there's a point at which an innovation, you have to make a decision between licensing or using it to create a company. And all the time that we've been at the URC, we benchmark our technology transfer activities to 7 other peer university innovation clusters. And one of the things that we seem to do quite a bit of at the URC is licensing, which is really important because those are technologies that are going out to existing businesses in Michigan and across the country and helping them with, expanding their product line or making a more streamlined process or what have you. But you can't necessarily have a lot of startups if you're doing a lot of licensing. There's a decision point. Could we'll just open it up to the floor to talk a little bit about how you make that decision on a technology?
I'll take a crack, and then I want to ask Peter for his perspective because he was involved in it. But for us, it involves getting our mentors and residents to give their advice and opinion on inventions at the very earliest stage. We get 520-ish inventions a year at U of M. Every Friday for 3 hours, we're going through those and trying to evaluate the best resources to support them. And our mentors and residents are a really vital part of that. And so Peter lived that, and I'd love to hear his thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I think having people from industry in the room working with the licensing agents, especially people with contacts in industry that can call up a contact and say, does this sound interesting to you, is really valuable. I also, I have been on the other side of this equation. So companies that I've run, I've negotiated technology licenses with multiple universities during that 25-year period when I was in Silicon Valley. And I think the URC universities have done a terrific job, probably Michigan the earliest, by setting up the Business Engagement Center that Stella Wixom runs, which really works hand in hand with industry to help us navigate, the university's administration and rules, and kind of give us a concierge experience trying to license this technology out of the Tech Transfer Office. Michigan State, right, has set up the Innovation Center, and so it's very centralized, it's very visible. And Wayne State also has made changes recently to make the university easier for industry to deal with. So those efforts attract more outside investment from industry and are really important, I think.
Thanks, Peter. That is excellent. And you truly are URC. You know all 3 institutions. We actually met when you were at Wayne helping
Yes.
out. So, I think you bring up an interesting point, and we spend a lot of time here at the URC doing that benchmarking, see how we're doing, and we are all competing. We are competing with other universities, we're competing with other states, and sometimes we compete with each other. It makes for a healthy collaboration. But I'm wondering if some of you could talk a little bit about how we are doing as a cluster relative to other places around the country. This might be more like I'll just pick on you, Kelly, because you most recently came from NC State, so you know the North Carolina system really well. And so, you know, and Rich, I'm going to pick on you too. You just spent a year being the head of AUTUM, which is the National Organization for Tech Transfer Directors. And so you've gotten a bird's eye view across the nation and even internationally. So how are we doing, and what do you need? What could we be doing better here in Michigan?
I like to say different ecosystem, same conversation. Every cluster in the country that's, you know, not in the Bay Area or Boston or New York is having the same conversation. How do we create the flywheel? How do we create a stronger entrepreneurial ecosystem? How do we get more investment capital? And how do we leverage our great asset that is the research universities in our backyard to help us accomplish this? And I've got to say, I think we have a lot of strengths here. I think the programs and the subway map that you showed from the MEDC, it's the envy of every other state in terms of a very thoughtful series of programs designed to support and augment this this activity. And I mean, in terms, you produce great reports on how we're doing as a cluster. I'm very familiar with University of Michigan, and I'll say that for us, we launched 32 startup companies last fiscal year. 31 startup companies last fiscal year. MIT launched 32. So we are competing with the very best universities in the country. Our startup companies already in the time of this pandemic, since July, have raised $109 million in angel and venture financing. So for us, we want to compete with the very best ecosystems in the world. I think focusing on talent and focusing on that very earliest stage funding gap is going to help us be able to attract capital from the coast and attract talent from the coast. And as awful as it is, if there's a silver lining from this terrible pandemic, it's that it's going to make places like ours more attractive as people leave the very expensive areas on the coast seeking a higher quality of life. So I think now's the time to invest in the ecosystem and try to, you know, be proactive in recruiting talent and capital from those areas.
Ellie, if I can follow on, I would also just say, coming from the outside, better assets in this ecosystem as an entrepreneur and an investor, better assets, less competition. So I think we actually have a competitive advantage over the coasts where everybody, you know, is flocking to, or traditionally flocks to find good innovations to commercialize.
If I can just add one thing, and what Kelly gave a terrific summary, but one program that we have that's been pretty attractive is, again, another MEDC sponsored program, but we do have a program that helps fund postdocs who may be working on a startup company that is developed at the university, and it provides a way to supplement and support them so that they can potentially stay with that startup and help take it out. And so I think that's a terrific program for keeping talent that we have in the state. So not only do we have to recruit good talent from outside the state, but we want to keep our best and brightest as well. And the more that we can do that, the better.
Great. I don't know, Joan, you have anything to add from your perspective? You've been in your role for a long time. Lots of programs.
Well, I was one of those.
Come and gone.
Yeah. You know, I started out as a faculty member at Wayne State, and I transitioned over, and I have to admit that I was very lucky that during my career, as even pre-faculty member, I was exposed to people who had an entrepreneurial mindset, scientists who had an entrepreneurial mindset at a time that entrepreneurship was definitely what scientists didn't do. So I've seen an evolution of both the way that academia approaches tech transfer, and I think that's been a cultural change, and I think it does very, very well in Michigan. I think we are a very coordinated group of folks. I think we're very collaborative. I really do think Michigan is more than the sum of the parts. And I think that has been fostered by a lot of the programs that we have. As you say, we've got people in Michigan who have, you know, Peter's been at what, how many, 3 of the institutions, Braden, I feel like we stole him and we're very, very grateful for having stolen Braden. We have other mentors in our programs right now that have been at other institutions. So there's this flow of information and this flow of talent going between the institutions and knowing, oh, somebody over here is doing this, why don't we do that? And kudos to even some of the funding programs. Somebody called me and said, oh, I saw one of your technologies. I know somebody out in Silicon Valley who's really interested in that. So the connections that we can make by not just being insular in this little circle, having a call, but this broader networking that's coming from Michigan. And the fact that everybody in Michigan seems so friendly, it really is helpful. So, you know, I think I heard it said not so long ago, Michigan's doing everything right. We just have to mature a little bit. And I was trying to put that comment in context. And I thought about a professional athlete. They have all the talent when they're young, but they're not ready to play in the NFL or a professional team. They still need coaching. They still need to grow and develop and mature. And it seems like we are definitely on an upward, an exponential curve. I think that just the number of exits we've had from companies in Michigan just over the last few years is evidence that we are putting out quality companies and we are getting the job done. We just have to keep doing that and having people recognize that there is opportunity here.
I think that's well said. I was listening to you and to Peter, and I'm thinking about Braden, what you mentioned in your presentation about talent. You know, I was thinking about talent from the perspective of having mentors in residence to help shepherd entrepreneurs through or innovators through this process. But Braden, you were really mentioning how important talent is, and that might be part of what Joan is describing in our maturation process, I guess, so we could call it. And so, you know, making Michigan more of a destination for the kind of talent that startups need. Do you have maybe a couple comments on that, Braden?
So I think I'm trying to lead in off of your pickup. I think that it's the chicken and egg problem that I was trying to discuss, right? We need more of an ecosystem here to draw people in. You know, one of the notes I'd made that I skipped for the spirit of time is some of these real precise skills do exist in larger companies around here, but it's not always the same personality that fits in a large company in an entrepreneurial environment, right? So that even just having places for people to make that transition from a big company to a small company and kind of learn how some of those nuances might be are really important. I think when I reflect again on my kind of time as an MIR, I think about how the other MIRs really helped to shape me, right? If you look at that bench at U of M or at the T3N network, it's an impressive group of people, right? And these are folks that I really came to respect and helped me make that transition to a smaller company and kind of really understand what it meant to not be so specialized within a large company, but really have a broader experience that you bring to a small company where you've got to be able to do everything from the top to the bottom.
Thanks. So one of the other questions that came in is, well, I have a couple. One I think we've answered, but I think it's worth re-mentioning, is the question was, has COVID-19 changed, decreased the number of inventions coming out? Has the pandemic dampened your productivity? I think it's safe to say that's not happened. If anything, you've ramped up and been really focused on technologies that serve the pandemic. But those aren't the only technologies you keep putting forward. I think, Kelly, you guys rang the bell last week for a company that wasn't COVID related. So for those who may not know, at U of M, they ring a bell when a startup company is created. And I don't know, do you guys do that too, Joan and Rich? You ring a bell?
Not
ceremony? Yeah,
we have our circle of high fives. They run around our office.
Oh, that's awesome. But you guys are certainly busy on not just COVID related. It has it dampened. And so, so I think that that's important for folks to know. Another question we have here in the short time we have left is you guys have all done a pretty good job of describing the resources that are needed to do what you do. You know, the flip side of that is, the question is, what do we stand to lose if we don't invest in tech transfer in Michigan, if we don't keep making this progress? What kind of impact? I mean, we can talk about the jobs that aren't being created, the revenue that's not being generated, the virtuous cycle that gets interrupted. But really, I mean, there's a bigger impact too. So if you guys could talk a little bit about maybe in the few remaining moments, why it's so critical that we continue to invest in this process.
I'll take a quick start at it. So, you know, the research universities in Michigan, represented by the URC plus Michigan Tech, which is not in the URC. Michigan is fortunate to have one of the best research university systems in the country. We compare well with other clusters, and this is a resource for not only the American public, but for public in Michigan. And if we don't have these relatively small amounts of funds, which we currently use to accelerate things, the problem is that many great ideas are going to either take too long to get to the public, or they're not going to get to the public at all. Or if they do get to the public, they may have to move outside the state to do so. And so I think that as Michigan tries to diversify itself as a economy that is beyond just automobile, just hard manufacturing, I just think it's a too good an opportunity to let pass.
Thanks. Peter, you made a quick note and given your perspective. Do you mind sharing that?
Yeah, so the note that I made to Brittany in text is that, you know, Rich, Joan, Kelly have talked about how our ecosystem actually has all the components. The subway map has all the stops that we need to get a technology out there to benefit society. But does the world know that? Do the investors and the entrepreneurs who are looking for, the next set of opportunities, do they actually know how good the ecosystem is here and how terrific the assets are coming out of, especially these three R01 universities? What, $2.5 billion worth of investment generating all of this stuff. So I wonder if there's an advertising opportunity. Raleigh-Durham Research Triangle probably doesn't have half of the assets or the quality of assets that we have, but they do a lot more with it and communicate a lot more that this is actually a hub and a technical center.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. So we'll end on it. I want to take this moment to thank all of our panelists for the 90 minutes we've been spending together. I hope that the next time I have to do a COVID test, I have Jack's technology. And so, Arnold, I might kick it over to you briefly to let people know when this will be available, that it's been recorded and it can be shared, correct?
Yes, it's being recorded, and we'll get that over to you and Amber for posting within the next couple of days.
Great. Thank you. And thank you to everyone who joined in with us today. We really appreciate your interest and your time. Should you have any questions, you are more than welcome to reach out to us. With that, we will say goodbye.
Thanks very much for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Thanks.